This is the Ohio Farm Bureau podcast. I'm Ty Higgins. H2Ohio was introduced by Governor DeWine back in 2019, a water quality program that's helping farmers in Northwest Ohio adopt best management practices on their farm, making a real difference in protecting Ohio's water resources, in particular, Lake Erie. Joining us this week is Clark Hudson. He's program coordinator for H2Ohio in the Western Lake Erie Basin. Clark, good to see you. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
As I mentioned, this was brought forward in 2019, and boy, the numbers since then, 1.5 million acres, about 35% of the Western Lake Erie Basin have been enrolled, 2,500 farmers taking part of the program in Northwest Ohio. There's really been an interest in this voluntary program from day one.
Yeah, we've had phenomenal interest. We've had, phenomenal sign-up. The sign-ups just, kind of blew the doors off. We were hoping for a couple 100,000 acres initially, and we had tremendous sign up. This has probably been the biggest program, obviously, I've ever been involved with ODA or in my previous careers. So I'm real happy. We're wrapping up the first 3-year contract cycles for the 14 counties in the Western Lake Erie Basin in the Maumee watershed. So those practices through 2023's crop year, through this crop year. So they're putting nutrients out there right now, planting those crops, and then we'll be evaluating that and wrapping that up later this summer. So that's kind of wrapping up our first set of contracts. We're a couple years delayed in the rest of the Western Lake Erie Basin, the Sandusky watershed. We didn't really start until last year was our first year of starting implementing practices. So they've got 2 more years on their agreements. And I'll talk a little bit later about our hope to expand across the rest of the state.
As with any program of this size, when you implement it, you realize there are some things that work very well and some things that might need adjustment. What have we seen adjusted in H2Ohio since 2019?
Well, I think the thing we saw, probably the biggest adjustment we saw is trying to make the program a little bit more simple. We got to reach our goals. So we've got to do, placement of nutrients. We need to get those nutrients to the ground. So we're not really changing that, but getting to understand the way producers implement those practices. For instance, a producer, typically, if he's putting fertilizer out there and he's in a corn and bean rotation, he puts that fertilizer out there only 1 year of 2 years. He puts all of his fertilizer out before the corn crop, typically. So we're getting a benefit from both of those years. We're seeing all of those nutrients for that crop cycle placed in 1 year, but we really only get to count those acres every other year. So figuring out how to best truly reflect what we're doing has been a challenge. Obviously, weather challenges every year is different. I tell people I've never seen a typical year in farming. Every year is its own creation. So that's probably the biggest thing. And then the other thing is our practices where we're trying to keep cover on the soil over the winter time. We have a forage practice, we had a small grain practice, and we had an overwintering cover crop practice. So one of the things we've looked at as we move forward, so in our next sign up in those 14 counties, we're just going to have a practice called overwintering cover. So you can plant wheat, you can put a cover crop out, you can have forages established, and you'll get the same payment for each of those practices. The nice thing about that is we typically see in any given year, maybe 3 to 5% of the wheat that gets planted ends up not going to harvest because it's good enough for a cover crop, but it's not really good enough to harvest. So we've had producers ask us if they could, shift that practice from a wheat practice, a small grain practice, to a cover crop practice. In some cases, we've had guys use wheat as a cover crop and looks really great in the spring. And he says, hey, why would I tear that up? I'm just going to go ahead and harvest that. So it lets the flexibility, increase the flexibility there for the producer to do what's best for his decision, his best farming operation at any given time. So
you mentioned sign-up periods. I want to talk about that a little bit because there are some farmers in Northwest Ohio in these 24 eligible counties that kind of want to sit back and just see how it goes for the guys that sign up early. That's understandable. But if they are interested now that they have seen the program work for their neighbors down the road, what's that look like timeframe-wise?
Well, for the 14 counties, obviously, as I said, we're ending the first contract period. So we're going to be re-enrolling and opening up enrollment later this year, probably in early fall to winter. In those 14 counties for people that are already enrolled and for anybody who did not take advantage and enroll in H2Ohio. Last time, they're certainly more than welcome to come in and enroll in the program. The only thing they will need to do is they will have to have be ready to have a management plan written immediately. They won't be given a lot of time to get that developed. So they need to get soil tests taken. They need to make sure they got a nutrient management plan that's within our specs, from the get-go. But even in the 10 counties right now, the other part, if a producer wants to add acres, maybe he picked up a farm or might have a few producers that didn't sign up. And if they want to sign up, they can contact their local soil and water conservation district. Those districts have had producers that didn't complete all of the practices in the first year. We've had a few people cancel. So there are some dollars available. We always encourage people to reach out to your local soil and water conservation district and talk to your staff there and see if they're really interested in doing it. Again, they need to be ready to go from day one. They need to have the nutrient management plan ready to go before we're going to allow them to sign up those.
You mentioned dollars. It does take funding in order to make this program succeed, and we want to see it continue where it is now, but also to expand, something that Ohio Farm Bureau and our members have advocated for pretty heavily in the 2023 state budget process. What are the hopes of ODA as these budget numbers begin to take shape?
I think in working with the administration, we had come upon about a $69 million ask for statewide for H2Ohio. Of that, about 60 million or 59 million of that would be to fund practices for the next 3 years in the Western Lake Erie Basin, and about $10 million to allow us to expand outside of the Western Lake Erie Basin, essentially into the rest of the state. So as far as I've heard, that's made it through the House fairly intact, our cost share dollars. So that's in the Senate right now, and they're holding hearings on that. I think even today, I heard that the director and Chief Hines were down at the State House doing testimony. So we're very hopeful that gets through. And if that is the case, then we're going to be prepared to late this year or early next year be able to launch H2Ohio in the remainder of the state, even though it's still on a limited basis.
That means a lot of farmers that have maybe heard about the program, just simply don't know enough about it, will want to become involved or learn more. How can they do that? How can they get prepared as this program hopefully begins to expand across the Buckeye State?
Well, I think obviously the first thing is just make sure that you know what nutrient requirements you have. So having current soil test on all your fields, and under Ohio Revised Code, that's within a 3-year period. So if you've got current soil tests, if you don't have soil tests on your fields, get prepared or get lined up to get those taken this fall. Likely we won't start in the remainder of the counties until after the first of the year. But essentially what we're going to do in that is we're going to just start with just a nutrient management plan. At least that's our plan as of right now.
Clark Hudson joining us on the Ohio Farm Bureau podcast, heading up H2Ohio for the Western Lake Erie Basin. You can find out more about the program and how to get involved at h2.ohio.gov. What does the cost-benefit analysis of H2Ohio say about the benefits to Ohioans? Not just farmers in the program, but Ohioans as a whole. Well, the results are actually very, very good for H2Ohio. We'll talk to the analyst who put that data together coming up after this on the Ohio Farm Bureau podcast. Since 1919, Ohio Farm Bureau has been working for you, advocating for farm families, for Ohio agriculture, and our local communities. From the State House in Columbus, all the way to Washington, D.C., Ohio Farm Bureau is feeding your need for new ideas. As we look towards the future and the changes coming along with it, one thing will never change: our mission. Working together for Ohio farmers to advance agriculture and strengthen our communities. Learn more and become a member today at ohiofarmbureau.org. Welcome back to the Ohio Farm Bureau podcast. I'm Ty Higgins. According to a recent new economic analysis, a voluntary state-run program is paying dividends by reducing the amount of fertilizer that's running off into Ohio waterways and causing harmful algal blooms. That analysis was done by Scioto Analysis. And joining us on this week's Ohio Farm Bureau podcast is Michael Hartnett, an analyst with Scioto Analytics who helped produce the report, and the principal of Scioto Analysis, Rob Moore, joins us on the Ohio Farm Bureau podcast. Welcome to you both. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Ty.
Hey, Rob, I'll start with you as the principal. Just kind of give us a 30,000-foot view of what Scioto Analysis is.
Sure. Thanks, Ty. We're a public policy analysis practice that's based in Columbus, Ohio. We were started in 2018. with the goal of trying to improve public policy analysis at the state and local level. And this cost benefit analysis that you're talking about is actually part of a series of cost benefit analyses that we've been doing over the past few years, demonstration analyses to show people what cost benefit analysis is and how it can be carried out when it's done well. We had done a study in 2019 on the use of cost benefit analysis in Ohio, and looking over about 30 different agency websites and a whole bunch of think tank websites, and sending surveys out to about 40 different institutions across the state. We were not able to identify a single cost benefit analysis in the state in the past 11 years that conformed to all of the 8 best practices of a cost benefit analysis. So this is part of this series of us showing how to do cost benefit analysis, and that's where this report had come from.
Why was H2Ohio chosen for this type of study?
So, according to some recent research in Journal of Earth Economics, Ohio's water quality is costing the state about $240 per capita, where for the average state it costs about $130 per capita. So, we all sort of intuitively know that there's a water quality problem in Ohio, and just because of the severity of the actual monetization of it, we were looking for programs to evaluate that were focused on water quality. And we came across the H2Ohio program as something that had already been implemented and was, in the process of expanding to other counties across the state, and just thought it would be a good target for one of these, example cost benefit analyses, so we could show how to evaluate a program like this, what it goes into that, and, get an estimate for how much it's actually returning.
So what are the data points you're looking at? What went into finding the data for this type of analysis?
So it comes in essentially 2 parts. There's the, valuation side of things, where we need to go out and get estimates for how much, these things are actually costing and how valuable the benefits are, and sort of the actual water quality reduction side. How effective is this? And for the effectiveness side of the piece, we went just straight to the reports from the H2Ohio program. We, it's too soon for there to be actual data about these things from like Lake Erie, which is where most of the phosphorus loading has happened. And so we relied on reports from the state EPA and from the State Department of Agriculture on how much phosphorus was being reduced in those areas. For valuation, we turned to academic literature, and this is, where policy analysis sort of sits in between the practical, what is actually happening out in the field, and the academic world of what are sort of the theoretical ideas behind these sort of policies. And so for our valuation side, we turned to a study that was done on phosphorus reduction in Wisconsin, and how much people were willing to pay for reducing phosphorus. And we ended up finding that, for each kilogram of phosphorus removed, it was worth about $75 in terms of things like additional recreation, increased property values, and fewer costs spent on cleaning up lakes later down the line.
When you really burrowed into Ohio, what did the data tell you about H2Ohio and how well it's working, and how much it's worth to all Ohioans?
Yeah, so we found that it's a pretty efficient use of resources. As it currently stands in the Maumee River watershed, we found that it probably is returning about 4 to 1 in terms of, dollars spent towards value received, which is pretty good for a program like this. It's a very efficient use of resources. A lot of this is just because, Lake Erie and the Maumee River watershed is full of harmful algal blooms, and the reduction of phosphorus there is really important. And, it's really important across the entire state, but in that area in particular, and in Lake Erie, there's a lot of excess phosphorus loading, and the benefits of reducing that phosphorus is pretty significant. So for the subsidized, voluntary nutrient management plans, we found that, the program as it stands is going to cost only about $700,000 in terms of additional, excess burden of the taxes that are going to need to be funding these subsidies. But with the phosphorus that we expect to be removed, we think it's going to be about $3 million worth of benefits. So, $2 million worth of net benefits.
Now, how's this data being used, right? We're in the middle of the budget process, or at least, I guess, as far as the process, we're halfway through getting this budget in. It's through the House, on its way to the Senate. So, Rob, I'll ask you and Michael this question. How do you see this analysis being used as the budget process continues here in Columbus?
I would love to see more cost-benefit analysis done at the state level and utilized in policy making. At the federal level, whenever a regulation is put in place that's over, I believe the threshold is $100 billion in impact, then it has to go through a formal cost-benefit analysis process. Now, at the federal level, they spend about $1 million per cost-benefit analysis. We're doing this as a part of our social bottom line as a social impact firm. So we're getting funds from other projects and doing this, without a client, just because we want to demonstrate how these are done. So we're doing this on the cheap compared to how they do it at the federal level. You don't have to spend $1 million to have a great cost benefit analysis, though. And I think there's a lot of in between that can be done there. I am the policy chair for the Ohio Program Evaluators Group, which is a group of program evaluators across the state that are involved in mental health and addiction services, environment, education, health and human services, a range of different topics. And we have a policy platform. And one of those pieces is that we think cost benefit analysis should be used in evaluating regulations that are put in place by the state and also in legislation. So we have the Legislative Service Commission for the state legislature, which is the research arm of the state legislature that actually has as many staff members as the Congressional Budget Office does. So we have a very well-funded, a very well-resourced research arm to our legislature, but cost-benefit analysis doesn't currently happen. It's mainly focused on just budget analysis. And by using this tool, at least for some of these bigger programs or programs where we're trying to make decisions about how much to spend it on, we could have a real big return on our investment. Just by doing a little bit of research, we can figure out if things are actually having the social impact that we want it to have.
And Michael, I guess the bottom line is, as we look at the budget and H2Ohio, we would hope to expand this water quality program to maybe the entire Lake Erie watershed or perhaps the entire state in years to come. Your analysis says that's a pretty good idea.
Yeah, I think the most important part of the analysis is when we, any sort of projection like this has some sort of randomness baked into it. And when we accounted for that randomness, what we found was even under sort of our worst case scenario for our inputs, this still has net benefits when we expand it to the entire state, and pretty large ones. Water quality is very bad across all of the state, and even if it's not flowing into the Lake Erie Basin, which is obviously a very important watershed, but the Ohio River and flowing into the southern parts of the states, that is also an area where there are algae blooms and where there is excess phosphorus loading. So expanding this program to the entire part of the state seems to be a net benefit, even under pretty poor scenarios that we've projected.
How often do you think this program will get a look from you guys as it moves forward and expands?
This is one of those things where, because we are doing this, as part of our social bottom line, we probably won't be revisiting the voluntary nutrient management plans going forward.